In line with President Yoon Suk-yeol's campaign pledge, the South Korean government has announced plans to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. The government explains the move was necessary to adjust to the changing social environment and enhance efficiency of related tasks. And the issue has got many curious about gender ministries and policies in countries that boast some of the highest levels of gender equality, a lot of them centered in Europe. To tell us more about this, a very special guest joins us today for our Zoom In segment all the way from Berlin. Marion Boker, the president of the International Alliance of Women, is joining us through Zoom this morning. And we thank her so much for joining us because it is actually 1:30 a.m., past 1:30 a.m. over there in Germany. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, President Boker, we really appreciate you taking the time out and staying up so late to join with us live.
It's a pleasure. It's an urgent issue, so I'm here.
Okay, well, before we begin, we'd like to learn and let the listeners learn a little bit more about you and your journey as a women's rights leader and also a human rights leader. You're currently the president of the IAW, the International Alliance of Women, and you're also very active with UN Women as well. So tell us more about your journey, how you got to this point that you're in, and what your primary focus is at your current, in your current capacity as president of the IAW.
Yeah, actually, when I was a little girl, it started when I don't know, have always alongside with me this kind of sound of sexism today, I would say. So some boys harassed you, some when you become 12, 13, sexualized you, expected some girlish behavior. But if you tell them, or I told them, I want to go and study and have a serious jobs, there were already these remarks like, really serious? You should become a mother. Don't you want to have a lot of children? This was in the 60s, actually. It has maybe changed, but it went on all the time. When I was 15, I had a school classmate and she became pregnant and she was hidden. Certainly she wasn't there. So we talked about why couldn't she abort? Why couldn't she sit in a classroom and be pregnant and get a child? Why is this big, chatting all around, but nobody talked truth? So later in the university, we had the same stories, recognizing that men were always recognized when they're talking the same things like we said before, and many things like this. So I started joining groups of women in the age of 16, then at university, and it was more the activism then which came in my life. And then I joined groups. I invented a women's archive and research center. Today you would say gender studies. And it developed. So I became a member of organizations, campaigns, and I couldn't get these feminist activities out of my life. Even in my jobs, they were all circled around gender issues and to improve by human rights, by implementing women's rights and fight for this. So after these jobs, there was a certain stage I don't know, got these kind of functions in NGOs, but also decided myself to become an entrepreneur as an independent consultant for human rights and gender issues. And it is about men, women, and all the other genders, LGBTIQ, about children's rights, boys' rights, but a lot more on women's rights because they are more often violated or women are discriminated.
Right. According to the annual Gender Equality Index that's released by the World Economic Forum, Germany, your country, is ranked 10th out of over 140 nations, boasting very, very high levels of gender equality. So let's dive into it a little bit more. Tell us more about the gender policies in Germany, how they're able to establish themselves as one of the leaders of gender equality. And in your country, is there a separate ministry that is dedicated to promoting gender rights and women's rights?
Yes, I think we have a long story of the second wave of women's movement from the 60s. 68 is such a date everybody remembers as the student revolution, and more than half of it had been women. And they had claimed already for gender officers in municipalities, for departments, for a structure, fixed structure, which is working all through the system to improve the situation or the status of women and their rights. And I think in the beginning of the 80s, we started to have a ministry for women and family and senior and youth affairs. So, but still in the 50s, we had this kind of department in the labor ministry, like the allies, the US allies after the Second World War have invented this. And so we have a long story with this ministry. But finally, when Germany ratified the CEDAW Convention, the UN Women's Rights Convention, um, it was necessary to establish such a national machinery of the advancement of women, because the CEDAW Committee, the CEDAW Convention, actually asked each country who has ratified, a state party, to have such a ministry. And yes, we have one, and they are doing all the time through a good job, but not fully. I mean, there are many, many things and issues open. And as you see, the CEDAW reports every 4 or more or less 8 years on Germany, like the same on South Korea or on all the other state parties, there's lots of critics. So every 4 or 5 years, there are many improvements, but slowly, slowly, too slowly for our, I would say, aim to have such a improvement that we can enjoy de facto all our human rights. But this is not the case. It's going slowly, and sometimes through COVID, for example, through financial crisis, through certain times, or when majorities in the parliament are changing, we have backlashes also. And it is not just a straight process, as you might know from your country too. And there are many issues we have improved. And I must say, in Europe, the northern countries are even more better, and there had been role models. But you see, with Sweden, it can happen that there is another majority in parliament, and it is at risk that all their advancements will resist or be maintained.
Well, let's take a closer look at those Northern European countries: Sweden, Iceland, Finland, Norway. They almost always are at the top of the list when talking about the Global Gender Equality Index. So, from your expertise, your area of expertise, how do you assess the policies that come out of those countries that allow for a certain high standard of equality? Is it a cultural thing? Is it based in traditions, or is it more so that the women in those countries fought for it with activism, being very proactive about the rights that they wanted secured and guaranteed by their governments in a legal setting?
Yeah, for example, in Norway and in Iceland, I don't know exactly from Sweden, but I think in the very, very early stages when they settled in these countries, the people had also some democratic structures in which strong women had talked already in the midst of people who made the decisions for the people. And I think this is a issue of a long her story or history of participation of women, or that men had also listened to strong women, which you should better ask Icelandic or Swedish or Norwegian women. But I've heard about it, and I think this is one of the root causes why probably they have such a good standing in these societies. But on the other hand, I think there is a lot of violence against women, as in our countries, in the northern countries. So they are not de facto at this stage of 100% of women's rights. They have not realized that now, but they have been very active. They have organized big demonstrations, sometimes like a general strike, So they could enforce politics by their demonstration and fights much more than we have ever done in Germany, for example. We have never had this strike of women. Spain had something like this for a couple of years ago. And I think the northern countries also had learned more earlier that if women have a higher percentage of participation, if they are on the jobs, if they have good childcare, so to be able to participate in the labor market and have a higher income, that the sharing of burden in the domestic relationships with their husbands and families creates more wealth. And I think a kind of social justice and wealth goes together with the participation of women, together with better implemented rights of women. So that's why the high standards of wealth they are aiming for have, I think, convinced more men in the society and women that more women rights must be ensured. And this is not the case so much already in Germany or Austria and the southern countries, because sometimes this is ignored. Even the statistics is showing there's more wealth as more women are participating in all areas and are earning in the jobs and paying tax and are able to, share the burdens with the family, the children, the care work. But this lesson, I think we all have to learn better. And many times we have learned from their new laws, which came earlier, and the northern countries have very often been role models with a kind of new law, which we then copied or fight for another 10 years. And then it was implemented, for example, in Austria, Germany, Spain, or elsewhere in Europe.
So is that those lessons, the more economic freedom, the ability for the nuclear family to generate wealth, improve relations between the husband and the wife in the traditional, compared to the traditional role of the husband just being the breadwinner and the wife being the homemaker. Like, are those the lessons that we need to take away for Asian countries, especially? You talked about the importance of culture and how in some of the Northern European countries, from a very early point in their history, they allowed women to voice opinions and take leadership roles and have men listen to the opinions of women. But in Asia, traditional historical, cultural aspects are far different from that, where it was a very male-dominated society for thousands of years. And it's just been in recent modern times where women were able to join the workforce and were able to come out of the house and have an economic earning power and be places of leadership in business and in government. So how do we close that gap a little bit, especially in Asian countries like South Korea?
Yeah, on the one hand, I think it is worth to look into history or her story of your countries, because I'm sure you can discover maybe some exceptional phases when women had been strong, maybe some effects which then had convinced people to allow these or that women to participate more, because sometimes in many countries we still not know everything about our history or her story. And when we do more research and look more into the history, we see that women haven't been useless or only in the family, or, there have been better times, worse times, but this is the one thing to learn from history or her story. But I think nowadays we can learn from all other countries who are better off, who create wealth. And I think it's not only wealth in the one single independent family, but in the municipality, in the communities, in the state. So all together. And I think this today, in the challenge or in the light of the challenge of that we have to master the climate change and the whole planet, and we are on one planet, I think it is not so much anymore on looking into one's own single culture, but also looking more broader to the global cultures and effects of, for example, gender equality. And sorry, I think it is on you to decide what you want to pick up, what is your role model in other countries, which are best practice examples. But I'm very sure that South Korea, after all the last decades, is still aiming for wealth, still aiming for livelihood quality, and for mastering all the crises and the challenges of the future. So I think, and not talking only about wealth, but having more capacity of more people who engage in to mitigate or to fight climate change or to develop new technologies which will help us, or for peace. There are many proofs that if women are on the peace table, not only in the negotiations, but also in keeping peace for the next hundreds of years and longer, or create more ideas and creativity, all this shows that if you include women and allow them to unfold their capacities, a society is much more rich and has more options. Why shall somebody today limit its own society's capacities by just restricting 50% of the population to a certain closed area or life sphere? I think we should all know that this is gone and this is hampering our development. So I think by the elite, by the governments, by the different groups in the society, this should convince. One maybe has to check more into the statistics. And probably you're doing today in your broadcast.
Okay, so and then we have about a minute left, but just to bring it all back and close it up to the question and the topic, the reason why we're interviewing you, we mentioned in the intro that the Ministry of Women and Family, or Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, is going to be abolished here in South Korea, and they're saying that the roles of that ministry is going to be given out to the other ministries that's already in place. So from your area of expertise, is that possible? What's your opinion in South Korea and the government going forward as they're moving ahead with this plan?
Yeah, it's a bit double-fold. I think, first of all, South Korea as a state party of CEDAW shouldn't do this because there should be a national machinery of the advancement of women. Yeah, it can be enhanced. There should be this ministry, but there can be departments who are busy with gender equality, women's rights, in each of the other ministries. But you can't just decrease this ministry to one department in, as I've heard, the Ministry of Health and Welfare. So if it is a strategy of enhancing, extending through all ministries, it could be defined as gender mainstreaming, but there must be a leading ministry, which has also as a ministry much more finances, much more competency to decide, to lay out new policies, draft new law, and definitely it must be approved in the parliament, but a huge or a real ministry has much more power than just a department or a few departments. So there must be a leading ministry. And yes, then you can extend and have everywhere a department of gender equality. But I think it would be definitely be criticized by the CEDAW committee if South Korea is coming with the next state report and the NGO reports. And I think it will decrease the capacity and the power which is behind gender equality. So it will slow down.
Okay.
And I would never advise this. I don't know which kind of politicians and why they are behind this. I mean,
right.
But maybe it's a part of the politics or men in politics.
It is. But
we have.
I'm sorry, we have to cut you off right there because of the time. But we appreciate your time and the interview so much. Thank you. That's gonna bring us to the end of Good Morning Seoul today. I'm gonna say signing off, and of course, Lena Kwon will be back on Monday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. Thank you.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.